They put on the Dawn rota because nobody else wanted it, and I took it because nobody else wanted it, and that is the whole truth of how I came to know him. I had been at the Ledran residence 11 years by then. 11 years of marble. You learn a building the way you learn a face, and the residence had the face of a thing built to impress people who would only see the front rooms. The front rooms got the sun and the flowers and the polishing crew of 6. The rest of it, the service stairs, the cold pantries, the long corridors where the lamps were set too far apart, the rest of it got me in a cart and a ring of keys heavier than my own hand. My name is Marin Vask. I was 61 that year, with a bad left knee and a way of moving through a house so quietly that the younger girls used to startle when they turned and found me already in the room. It was not a skill I cultivated. It was only that I had spent my life in places where being noticed brought you trouble, and being unnoticed brought you peace, and a body learns what keeps it safe. The East Wing was the part of the house I was told to leave alone. Not in writing. Nothing at the residence was ever in writing if it could be helped. It was the kind of instruction that came sideways, in the way the head of household, a tight-mouthed man named Corvin Hale, would say, "The East Wing is sealed," and then look at you a half-second longer than the words needed, to be sure you had taken his meaning. The doors at the end of the long gallery were kept shut. The windows behind them were shuttered from the inside. On the floor plans pinned in the service office, that whole quarter of the building was drawn in but left blank, the way mapmakers used to leave the edges of the world blank when they did not want to admit they had stopped looking. I left it alone for 11 years. I want that understood. I was not a curious woman. Curiosity is a luxury of people whose curiosity has never cost them anything, and mine had cost me a great deal when I was young. In another house, on another world, in a war that does not matter to this story, except that it taught me to keep my eyes on my own work. What changed was the cold. It came up through the service floor one winter, a draft I could not place, threading along the gallery from somewhere behind the sealed doors. I followed it the way you follow a smell of burning. Not from curiosity, but from the old reflex that says a cold like that means a window has failed, and a failed window means damp, and damp means the plaster. And the plaster was, in the end, my responsibility whether the room was sealed or not. I found the smallest of the East Wing doors unlatched. Not open, unlatched. The way a door comes loose, when the frame has swollen and shrunk through enough seasons that the bolt no longer seats. I told myself I would latch it and go. I did not latch it and go. Inside was a corridor I had never seen, narrower than the front halls. The marble here gone gray and unpolished. The dust on the floor lying in that flat, undisturbed sheet that only forms where no foot has fallen in. Years. Shutters along one side held back the dawn. Between two of them a single board had warped and let in a blade of pale light, and the cold was pouring through it. And I went to that window first, the way I would have anywhere, because a failed shutter was a thing I understood. That was when I heard him breathe. I am not ashamed to say I stood very still. It was not a small sound. It was the slow, deep, deliberate breathing of something large, and it came from the far end of the corridor, where a set of double doors stood half open onto a room I could not yet see into. I had worked in enough places to know the sound of an animal kept somewhere it should not be kept. I had cleaned cages. I thought, for one foolish moment, that it might be a dog the size of which I did not want to imagine, and then the breathing shifted, and a voice came out of the dark, and the voice was not an animal's. "Someone is here," it said. The words were slow and worn. The consonants softened the way an old man's are. "I can smell the lamp oil on you. You are one of the cleaning people." I should have run. A sensible woman runs. But there was nothing in the voice that frightened me. There was, if I am honest, a kind of relief in it. The relief of a person who has been alone long enough that any voice at all is a gift. And so, instead of running, I said the only thing that came to me, which was, I came about the draft. There was a long pause, and then very quietly the thing in the dark began to laugh. It was a dry, rasping, astonished laugh, the laugh of someone who has not had occasion to use it in a long while. "The draft," he said. "Yes, come and see about the draft." I went and saw about the draft. He was a dragon. I had seen them, of course. The residents hosted them at the great dinners, the Ledran envoys and their guests, sleek young things with scales like wet stone, and that careless confidence the young of any powerful people carry. I had served at the edges of those dinners and kept my eyes down, but I had never seen one old. I did not know, until that morning, that they got old the way we do, that the scales lost their gloss and went the dull gray of weathered slate, that the ridges along the spine, which on the young ones stood up proud and sharp, could sag and soften and lie down flat, like the crest of a bird that has stopped trying to be seen. He was enormous and he was diminished, both at once, folded into himself, in the corner of that ruined room, with his long neck curled down and his tail wrapped over his own feet for warmth. And where his eyes should have been there were two seams of pale scarred scale, grown over, sealed shut. He was blind. He had been blind a long time. He turned his head toward me as I came in. Not to look. He could not look. But to aim the broad, blunt front of his face at the sound of me, the way the blind do, and his nostrils worked, taking the smell of me apart. "You are old too," he said. "I can hear it, the way you carry your weight. One leg you trust and one you do not." "My knee," I said. "Yes." He settled his head back down onto his folded forelimbs. "They send the young ones to the front of the house. They send the old ones to the back. You and I are the back of the house cleaner." I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing, and I went and saw about the draft. The warped board had pulled a finger's width of gap at the shutter's edge. I had nothing with me to fix it properly, so I took the rag from my apron and the small flat blade I carried for scraping wax, and I wedged the rag into the gap and worked it tight, and the pouring cold thinned to nothing, and the room went still. When I turned back, he had lifted his head again. "It is warmer," he said. He sounded surprised. I had stopped expecting anyone to make it warmer. I should explain about the residence and how a thing like him comes to be forgotten in it. The Ledren Reach leased the world we stood on, and the residence with it, from a consortium that had owned the building through 3 different occupants, and did not much care what any of them did with the back rooms. When the Ledran took the lease, they took the contents, and the contents, it seemed, had included him. A creature left behind by a previous tenant, an inconvenience attached to the property like a clause nobody had read closely. He was too large to move easily, and too old to be worth the trouble of moving, and so he had been shut into the east wing and left, the way a family leaves a piece of furniture too heavy for the new house, meaning to deal with it later and never dealing with it at all. The staff who had known what he was had cycled out years ago. The ones who remained knew only that the east wing was sealed and that Corvin Hale did. Not like questions about it. I think, by the time I found him, there was no one left in the building who could have told you his name. There was no one left who knew he had one. I went back the next morning. I told myself it was about the plaster. I brought a proper wedge of cedar shim that time, and a tin of putty, and I did the shutter the way it should have been done, and while my hands worked, I found myself talking to him, because the silence in that room had a weight I did not like, and talking was easier than carrying it. I told him about the weather, which I could see and he could not. I told him the dawn had come up red over the leased world's flat horizon, and that the frost was on the inside of the front hall windows in ferns. I did not think he would care. But he had gone very still while I spoke, his great head tilted, and when I stopped he said, in that worn, slow voice, "More. Tell me more of what it looks like." So I told him more. It became the shape of my mornings. I did the dead rooms of the east wing first now, before the rest of my rota, while the house above us still slept. And I talked while I worked, and he listened. I described things to him. It is a strange thing to describe the world to someone who cannot see it. You find out how lazy your own seeing has become. I had walked past the tall east window 1,000 times and never once looked at it, and now, because he wanted it, I looked, and I found there was a particular hour just after dawn when the light came through the warped old glass and broke into colors along the gray marble floor, and I told him about the colors, and he made a low sound in his chest that I came to understand was contentment. I learned, those mornings, what it took to make a thing real for him. It was not enough to name a color. He had no colors left behind those sealed eyes. They had gone out so long ago, he told me once, that he could no longer summon them in his own mind, that even his memories of the high country had faded to shapes and weights and temperatures. The feel of cold stone, the give of moss, the particular warmth of a south-facing branch in the afternoon. So I learned to describe in the things he could still hold. I did not say the light was gold. I said the light was the warmth of a lamp held close to your face with the eyes shut. I did not say the marble was gray. I said it was cold under the hand the way a riverbed is cold, even in summer, even where the sun has been on it all day. He took these in greedily, the way a starving man takes food, and he gave them back to me changed. Yes, he would say. Yes, like that, like the underside of a stone you have lifted, the side that has never seen the day. And between the two of us, his hunger and my plain words, the dead room would fill for an hour with a world. "You see well for a human," he said once. "Most of you look without seeing. You look as if seeing were a thing you had already finished. I never had time for it before, I said. And now? Now I have a reason. He was quiet a moment. Then he said, tell me about the colors on the floor again. You left out the green. I had not left out the green. He was teasing me. It took me a while to learn that he teased. That under the worn slow's voice and the great ruined body there was a humor in him, dry and old. The humor of someone who has lost everything but his sense of the absurd. He teased me about my knee, telling me he could hear me deciding, every morning at the bottom of the service stair, whether the climb was worth it, and telling me he had begun to wager with himself on which days I would come. He teased me about the way I talked to the brazier when I thought he was sleeping, scolding the coals when they would not catch. When I learned that he teased, I found I had begun, without deciding to look forward to my mornings in the dead wing more than to anything else in my day. I would lie awake in the dark of the service quarters with the cold arithmetic of my life laid out as it always was, and I would think, in the morning I will go up and tell him about the dawn, and the arithmetic would lose every time to that small warm thought, and I would sleep. I began to bring him things. Not gifts, I had nothing to give, and he had no use for things, but the world carried up in my apron. A handful of frost scraped from the inside of the front hall glass, melting in my palm, so he could feel the cold of it, and I could tell him it had made ferns on the window. A sprig of the rosemary the kitchen grew in the south light, crushed between my fingers, held to his great working nostrils, so that for a moment the dead room smelled of something living and green. A flat stone, sun-warm, from the court, set against the underside of his jaw where the scale was thin, and he could feel the heat the day had put into it. He received each of these with a gravity that shamed me, turning them over in his mind the way a man turns over a letter from a place he can know longer. You are bringing me the world a piece at a time, he said. You are bringing me the day, since I cannot go out into it. And I said that was about the size of it, and he made the low sound in his chest, the contentment, and we left it there. I asked him his name, once, early on. He did not answer for so long that I thought he had not heard me. Then he said, I have been called many things. The people who built this house called me nothing at all. They called me it. When they spoke of me, which was seldom. Before that, and here something moved in the great gray body, a settling, a weight shifting. Before that I had a name in a language no living mouth speaks but mine. It would mean nothing to you. Tell me anyway. No, he said, and it was not unkind, only final. A name is a door. I have kept that one shut a long time. I do not open it for the smell of lamp oil and a kind voice, however much I have come to want the smell of lamp oil and a kind voice. He turned his blind face toward me. You may call me what you call me, the cleaner and the old gray thing in the back of the house. That is honest enough. That is more than I have had. So I did not have a name for him, and I did not press, because I of all people understood a shut door. I had a few of my own. What I learned of him, I learned the way you learn anything from the old, sideways in pieces, in the spaces between other things. He had come from somewhere very far and very lost. The colors I described to him, the dawn through the warped glass, woke something in him each time, and the something was always the same place. A high country, he told me, a country of stone and forest where his kind had lived in the cliffs and in the great old trees, in houses, he said. Houses built up among the branches and houses cut back into the rock. The houses of the living set apart from the houses of the dead, each with its own name and its own keeping. He spoke of it the way the very old speak of childhood, as if it were more real than the room he sat in. He told me, over those weeks, how it had worked, how a people keeps itself when it has no books and no stone tablets, only memory and the long lives of its keepers. Each house had a name, he said, and the name was not a label but a whole telling, who had built it, and who had been born in it, and who had died, and what the weather had done the year it was raised, and which of the great trees had given its branches to the building of it, and whether that tree still stood. A house of the living, when its people moved on or were lost, became a house of the dead, and was kept differently then, visited differently, its name spoken in a different register of the underspeech, the voice below the voice, so that even the dead were not forgotten, even the empty houses were not let go. There had been keepers whose whole life was the holding of these names, not the chief among the people, not the strongest, but the ones with the longest memory and the most patience, the ones who could be trusted to let nothing fall. He had been one of those. He had been, in the end, the last of those. It is slow work here, he said, the keeping. A keeper learns the names from the keeper before, year on year, until the old one dies and the names pass whole into the young one. That is how it is meant to go. The chain is meant never to break. He was quiet a while. The chain broke, and once, only once, his voice changed when he spoke of it, dropped lower and went rough, and he said that the houses had burned, that something had come through that high country a long time ago. He did not say what, and I did not ask. And the houses in the trees and the houses in the rock had burned, and the keepers had died faster than they could pass on what they held. The chain breaking in a dozen places at once, names going out unspoken, whole Telsings lost in a single night, because the only mouth that held them had been stopped. He told me he had been young then, the youngest of the keepers, and that the old ones had poured what they could into him in the time they had, hurrying, desperate, more than a young mind was ever meant to hold, and that he had carried it out of the high country on his back, like a man carrying water out of a burning house in his two cupped hands, losing some at every step, saving what he could. That is the thing about a memory, he said. It is not in the stone, and it is not in the tree. The stone burns, the tree falls. The memory is in the one who keeps it. And when the last keeper goes, he made a small gesture with one ruined wing, a folding, a closing. Then it is as if the place never was at all, as if all of them never were. The houses of the living and the houses of the dead, and everyone who ever had a name in either. All of it goes out at once, like a lamp, and the dark does not even know it has gotten darker. You're the last keeper, I said. It was not a question. I am the last keeper, he said, of a place that no longer exists, for a people who no longer come. I held them as long as there was a reason to hold them. But a keeper keeps for someone. Keeps so the young will learn, so the dead will be visited, so the names go on past him into other mouths. When there is no one to pass to, the keeping becomes only a weight. I have carried it a long time now, cleaner, with no one to set it down with, and I will tell you the truth no keeper is meant to say aloud. There were years in this cold room when I wished I could simply let it fall. Let the names go out and have done. It is a hard thing to be the only one who remembers. It is a hard thing to be a door that opens onto nothing. He turned his blind face toward me. So you see, the name I will not say is the name of that door. There is no harm in keeping it shut. I did not have an answer to that. I am not a clever woman, and I have never been good with grief, my own least of all. So I did what I knew how to do, which was the only thing I have ever known how to do in the face of a sorrow too big for words, which is the small thing, the near thing, the thing in front of me. The next morning I brought a brazier up from the cold pantry, an old coal burner the kitchen had retired, and I set it going in the corner of his room where the chill pooled worst, and I sat with him while it took the edge off the air, and I described to him the way the coals went from black to red to white, in the terms he could hold, the way a thing too hot to touch first only warms the air around it, then the air closer in, then the hand if the hand is foolish, and he listened, and, after a while he said, very quietly, "Thank you, cleaner." And I understood that he was not thanking me for the brazier. I should tell you it could not last, because of course it could not last. Things that are kept in the back of a house are kept there for reasons, and the reasons do not stop being reasons just because someone has started to love the kept thing. It was Hale who found me out. The head of household had noticed coal going missing from the pantry stores, and a man like Hale notices everything that costs money. And he followed the cold trail of it the way I had once followed the draft, and he came into the east wing one gray morning and found me sitting on an overturned crate beside a brazier in a sealed room, talking to a thing the residents had spent 11 years pretending did not exist. He did not shout. Hale never shouted. That was the worst of him. He did everything in the same flat administrative voice, whether he was approving a delivery or ending your livelihood. He stood in the doorway and looked at the brazier and looked at me and looked at the great gray shape in the corner, and the shape had gone very still, the way it had gone still the first morning when it heard me breathe. And Hale said, "This wing is sealed." There was a draft, I said. The plaster, "This wing is sealed, Vask." He let the silence sit. "Do you know what that is?" I looked at the dragon. The dragon could not look back. "I know what he is," I said. "He's old, and he's cold, and he's been left up here to die in the dark, and nobody in this house can even tell me his name." I had never spoken to Hale that way in 11 years. I saw it land. I saw, too, that it would cost me. He did not threaten me. He did not need to. He simply said, "The wing is to be left alone. The brazier goes back to the pantry. If I find you up here again, there will be a conversation about your position." And then he turned and went, and his shoes made no sound on the dust, because I had cleaned the dust away over the weeks of my coming. And that, more than anything, was what gave me away, the clean floor, the path my own feet had worn. I did not take the brazier back to the pantry. I want to be clear about what I was and was not. I was not brave. I was a 61-year-old housekeeper with a bad knee and no family in a position I could not afford to lose, in a house on a leased world a long way from anywhere I could call home, and the threat Hale made was a real threat, and I knew it. I lay awake that night doing the arithmetic of it, the cold arithmetic of a person who has been poor, and the arithmetic said, take the brazier back, leave the wing alone, keep your position. Let the old thing die in the dark the way it was always going to die in the dark, because that is not your fight, and you cannot afford fights. I knew the arithmetic well. I had run it all my life. It was the arithmetic that had kept me alive in the other house, on the other world, in the war I do not speak of. The arithmetic that says keep your head down, do your work, want nothing, love nothing you cannot afford to lose, and you will come through. It had brought me through. It had brought me, in the end, to a service cot in the back of a leased mansion, with no one in the whole turning dark who would notice if I did not wake, which is what that arithmetic earns you if you run it long enough and run it well. I had never once, in all my years, found a sum it could not solve. And in the morning I went back up to the east wing with the brazier going, because there are some arithmetic problems a person refuses to solve. He knew at once that something had changed. He could hear it in me, he said. The way I came up the stairs heavier on the bad knee, the way my breathing had a held-back quality. He found you, the dragon said. It was not a question either. He found me, and told you to leave the old thing in the back of the house to its fate. Something like that. And here you are. Here I am. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something I have carried with me since, and will carry, I think, to the end of my own days. He said, do you know, cleaner? In all the years of that high country, in all the keeping of all those names, I do not think anyone ever stayed for me when staying cost them something. They stayed when it was easy, when the houses stood and the fires were warm and there was honor in the staying, when the staying began to cost. And here his blind head turned toward me, slow and certain, finding me by the warmth of my body in the cold room. They did not stay, you understand. They were not bad. They were only people, and people leave when leaving is the sensible thing. I had come to believe that was simply what living creatures were. That staying was a thing that happened only when it was free. He let out a breath, that long, deep, deliberate breath I had first heard from the corridor. You have just shown me I was wrong about that, he said. At the very end, after all this time, I find I am glad to have been wrong. I did not trust my voice, so I said nothing. I went and saw about the brazier instead, because the small thing, the near thing, the thing in front of me, is the only language I have ever been fluent in. He failed quickly after that. I have seen enough dying to know its shape, in people and in animals both, and I knew its shape in him. The deep breathing came slower and with a catch in it. He ate less of what I smuggled up to him. The kitchen scraps and the cuts passed their date, and then he ate nothing. The gray of his scales went grayer. He slept more, and in his sleep he spoke, sometimes, in the language no living mouth spoke but his, a low rolling murmur of a tongue full of long vowels and soft stops, and I understood none of it, but I understood that he was somewhere else when he spoke it, somewhere high and green and gone, walking the houses in the trees and the houses in the rock, and saying over the names of them, keeping them, the way a man counts coins in the dark to be sure he has not lost any. I have sat a good many deathbeds. It is one of the things the old of my profession end up doing, in houses where the family is too busy or too far or too cold to do it themselves. You sit with the dying because you are the one who is there, the one already in the room with the cart and the keys, and someone should be, and no one else will. I had learned long ago that the dying do not want clever words and do not want weeping. They want a known voice and a warm hand and the sense that they are not, in the last of it, alone. So that is what I gave him. I did not tell him he would be well. We were both too old for that lie. I told him about the dawn, and I kept the brazier fed, and I kept my hand on the cool gray scale of his great folded foreleg so that he would always know, when he surfaced, exactly where in the room I was. He grew lighter in his speaking. Some part of him, I think, having found one soul to set the weight down with, had begun the long work of setting it down. He told me the small things now, not the great tellings of the houses, but the foolish near things a long life collects. A stand of trees that had grown in the shape of a cupped hand, where the young of his kind had gone to be alone. A season the cold had come early, and the whole people had crowded into the rock houses, and an old keeper, his own teacher, had passed the time telling the names over and over, until the children could say them in their sleep. The particular sound the high wind made through a certain notch in the cliffs, which he made for me, low in his chest, and which I will hear, I think, on windy nights for the rest of my life. He was emptying his pockets. He was showing me what had been in them all along. "You will not remember the names," he said once, surfacing. "I am not giving you the names. They are not yours to keep, and you could not hold them. It took a keeper's whole life to learn them, and you have only an old woman's whole life, which is a different thing." He said it gently. "But you will remember that there was a high country, and houses in the trees, and a people who kept their dead by name. That much you will carry, and that is more than the dark would have had of them. You are a small keeper, cleaner, the smallest there has ever been. But you are a keeper. I have made you one this winter without your leave." I sat with him through it. I did my rota first, quick and careless, and took the dressing down for the careless work without arguing, and I spent every morning hour I could steal in the east wing with my hand flat on the cool gray scale of his great folded foreleg, and I talked to him when he was awake and was quiet with him when he was not, and I did not let him be cold, and I did not let him be alone, because those were two things I could do, and a person should do the things she can do. "Tell me about the dawn," he would say, when he surfaced, and I would tell him about the dawn. It was on one of those mornings, with my hand on his foreleg, and the brazier going, and the red light coming up through the warped glass, that I felt the change in the house. You learn a building the way you learn a face. I felt it before I heard anything, a difference in the way the air moved, a tension running down through the marble from the front rooms to the back. Then I heard the bells. The residence had a system of bells for receiving important guests, and I had heard them perhaps a dozen times in 11 years, always for the great dinners. They were ringing now, all of them, in the wrong sequence, in a hurried clamor I had never heard. And under the bells I heard Hale's flat voice gone high and fast, and under that I heard a sound I had no name for, a vast low resonance, a sound felt in the chest more than the ear, like the bottom note of an organ too large to fit in any room I knew. The dragon's blind head came up off his forelimbs. He had not moved that fast in all the weeks I had known him. His ruin-sealed eyes turned toward the sound, and the loose flat ridges along his spine, the ones that had lain down soft as a tired bird's crest, stood all the way up, sharp and proud, the way I imagined they had stood when he was young, and a tremor ran the whole length of his great gray body, and he said, in a voice I had never heard from him, a voice with the rust shaken off it, "That is the underspeech." "The what?" "The underspeech. The voice below the voice. My people." He stopped. His sides were heaving. "My people speak it. Only my people speak it. I have not heard it in," and he could not finish, and I understood that he was afraid to finish, afraid to say the number of years, the way you are afraid to say a hope aloud in case the saying of it kills it. I went to the warped window, and I worked my fingers under the shutter, and I forced it open, the swollen old wood shrieking in its frame, and the dawn poured in, and I looked down into the great front court of the residence, and I saw them. There were 9 of them. They had come down out of the red dawn sky and set down in the court, and they were nothing like the sleek, careless young ones who came to the young dinners. These were dragons in their full power, vast, dark, scaled in colors I had no words for, deep reds going to black, with the great ridged crests standing up proud along their spines and their wings folded like cloaks of armor, and they stood in the court in a loose half-circle, utterly still, in the way that powerful things are still, and at the center of them stood one larger than the rest, older than the rest, its scales gone the same weathered gray I knew so well, and it was this one that was making the sound, the underspeech, the vast low organ note that ran down through the stone of the house and up through the soles of my feet. Hale was down in the court. I could see him, a small frantic figure in his black household coat, doing the only thing a man like Hale knows how to do in the face of something he cannot put in a ledger. Talking, his hands moving, no doubt explaining that there had been some mistake, that the residents had no knowledge of any such creature, that whatever they were looking for was surely somewhere else. The gray dragon at the center did not so much as turn its head toward him. It lifted its blind. No, not blind, this one could see. Its eyes were great and golden open. It lifted its head and it sent the underspeech up, the face of the building, up toward the sealed and shuttered east wing, and it was calling. I understood that much without understanding a word. It was calling, the way you call into a house when you have come a very long way and you do not yet know if anyone is still alive inside. Behind me, in the cold ruined room, the old gray dragon answered. I have heard a great many sounds in my life. I have heard a building come down. I have heard the particular silence of a place where something terrible has just happened. I had never heard, and will never again hear anything like the sound that came up out of that old failing body in the back of that forgotten house. It was the underspeech. I knew it now. But it was broken and worn and barely there. A thread of the great note the one below was sending up. A thread held together by nothing but will. He had lifted his head and his neck off his folded limbs, and the whole of him was shaking with the effort. And he was answering. He was saying, in the voice below the voice, in the only language that could carry it, "I am here. I am still here." Down in the court the 9 went silent all at once, and then they came up the face of the house. They did not use the doors. They did not need the doors. The gray one at the center rose on its wings, and the others rose with it, and they came up the wall of the residence. The east wing shutters that had been sealed for 11 years burst inward, all of them at once, in a shriek of old wood and a flood of red dawn light, and the room I had cleaned and warmed and sat in was suddenly full of light and air, and the vast dark shapes of them, folding their wings, lowering their great heads, and I pressed myself back against the wall, and made myself small the way I had learned to make myself small a long time ago, because that is what you do when the powerful arrive, and you are no one. The gray one at the center came forward through the others. It came to the old blind dragon, and it lowered its great gold-eyed head until the 2 long faces nearly touched, and it spoke, and now I could hear that the underspeech had words in it, the long, voweled, rolling words of the language no living mouth spoke, except that here were 9 mouths that spoke it. Here was a whole people that spoke it, and the old blind one had been wrong all this time. The people had not all gone. They had only been scattered across the dark a long way from the high country, looking, the way you look for the last of a thing you thought you had lost entirely. I did not understand the words, but I understood the shape of what happened in that room. I understood that the old blind dragon in the corner, the old gray thing, the inconvenience attached to a property like a clause nobody had read, was not the least of his people but the greatest. I understood, from the way the 9 of them lowered their heads, from the way the great gold-eyed gray one pressed its brow to his and held it there, that he was the last keeper, yes, but that the keeping had not opened onto nothing after all. That somewhere out in the dark his scattered people had been trying for a very long time to find the one who still held the names of the houses in the trees and the houses in the rock, the names of the living and the names of the dead. Because without the last keeper, a people is only a crowd with no map back to who they were, and they had searched, and at the very end, in the back of a leased house on a borrowed world, they had found him. And I understood, when the old blind dragon spoke again, and I heard my own, not my name. He had never had my name. When I heard the small particular sounds that meant the cleaner, the warmth, the brazier, the dawn through the glass, repeated over in that rolling tongue, and saw the great gold-eyed head turn, slowly, deliberately, toward the corner where I had made myself small against the wall, I understood that he was telling them about me. The gray one looked at me. They all looked at me. 9 sets of eyes, golden amber and deep ember red, turned on a 61-year-old housekeeper pressed against the wall of a room she had been forbidden to enter. I have been looked at with contempt in my life, and with pity, and with the flat, unseeing look the powerful give the people who clean up after them. I had never, until that morning, been looked at the way those 9 looked at me. There was no contempt in it, and no pity. There was something I had no name for, something old and grave and unbearably gentle, and the great gray gold-eyed one came toward me across the room, slow, careful, folding itself down smaller and smaller as it came so as not to loom over me, until its enormous weathered head was lowered to the level of my own, close enough that I could feel the warmth of its breath, and it looked at me with those great gold eyes, and it spoke. It spoke in my language. I had not known they could. The words came slow and strange in that vast mouth, but they came clear. "He has told us," the gray one said, "what you did." I could not speak. I shook my head. Not in denial, only in the helpless way you shake your head when something is too large. "For 11 years, the gray one said, we searched the dark for the last of us. For 11 years he sat in the cold in the back of this house, and no one came, and he believed we had not come because we no longer cared to come. He believed he had been left." The great head tilted, the gold eyes steady on mine. He was not left, he was lost. The dark is very large, cleaner, and a single voice is very small, and we could not hear him. But you heard him. You did not know what he was. You did not know there was a reward, or a name, or a people who would come. You heard an old thing alone in the cold, and you stayed, and you made it warm, and you told it about the dawn. The gold eyes did not blink. Do you know what that is among us? Do you know what we call the one who keeps the keeper? The one who, without honor and without reward, and without even knowing the worth of what they hold, holds the holder of all our names. I shook my head again. The gray one told me the word. It was a long word in the rolling tongue, full of those soft stops and long vowels, and I cannot write it down because I cannot make the sounds, and it would shame the word to spoil it. But the gray one gave me the meaning, after, in my own plain language, and the meaning was this: the root beneath the root, the one who keeps the keeper, without whom the last of us would have gone out alone in the dark, and the names with him, and the high country never to have been at all. House cleaner is what they called you here, the gray one said. It is what this house wrote in its ledgers, and what its master spoke when he spoke of you at all. The great head turned, just slightly, toward the corner where Hale had appeared at last in the broken doorway, gone gray himself, silent, understanding finally that he stood in the presence of something his ledgers had no column for. We will call you something older, and it said the word again, the long rolling word, the root beneath the root, and the other 8 took it up, the underspeech moving through them, low and vast, and the sound of it went down through the marble and out through the broken windows into the red morning, and I stood in the middle of it, a small old woman with a bad knee being named. They took him home. It was not a quick thing or a simple one. He was too weak to fly, and so they did not make him fly. They built him a litter of all things, the way you would carry an old man, 4 of the great dark ones bearing it on the underspeech as much as on their wings, and they brought him down out of the east wing through the broken windows into the court in the full light of morning, and the whole residence came out to watch. The front room staff and the polishing crew of 6, and Corvin Hale and the Ledran envoys themselves, all of them staring, none of them with any idea what they were looking at, only that something enormous and grave was happening in their court that had nothing to do with them. They worked with a tenderness I would not have thought such vast things capable of, easing him, settling him, the gray gold-eyed one walking the whole while at his head with its brow against his, speaking low and steady in the rolling tongue, the way you talk a frightened creature through a thing it does not understand. Except he was not frightened. He had stopped being frightened the moment the underspeech first came up the face of the house. Before they bore him up, the gray one let me come to him. I went and put my hand one last time on the cool gray scale of his foreleg, the way I had every morning for those weeks, and he turned his blind head toward me and found me by my warmth, the way he always had. You never told me your name, I said. My voice would barely work. I never told you mine. We were just the cleaner and the old gray thing in the back of the house. Yes, he said, and then very quietly, so that only I could hear it under the great sound of his gathered people. But I will open the door now, cleaner. I have a reason to open it now. You showed me the door opens onto something after all. And he said his name, the name in the language no living mouth spoke but his. Except that now there were many mouths to speak it. Now there was a people to carry it. And so the name was not a door onto nothing any longer. It was a door onto home. He said it to me, the only soul outside his blood ever to hear it, and I will keep it the way he kept the names of the houses in the trees. Which is to say, I will keep it until I go, and I will not write it down, because some doors a person keeps shut not out of grief, but out of love. Then they bore him up into the red morning, the 9 of them and the old gray one between them, rising on the underspeech and the great dark wings, and they turned toward the high cold edge of the sky, and they were gone, carrying their last keeper home to a country that had burned a long time ago, but had never, it turned out, stopped existing, not while there was one who remembered it, and one who kept the one who remembered. I went back to work. I want to be honest about that, because it is the truest part. I did not go off to a new life. There was no new life waiting. That is not how it goes for women like me, and I would not have known what to do with one if there had been. The Ledran envoys, who had seen what they had seen, found they no longer wished to have a head of household, who had sealed such a thing in the back of the house to die, and Corvin Hale was gone within the month, and I will not pretend I was sorry. They offered me his post. I turned it down. I was too old to learn the front of the house, and the front of the house had never been mine. I asked instead only that the east wing be opened, the shutters mended, the light let in, the dust kept down, and that no one ever again be allowed to seal a living thing into the dark of it. And they agreed, and they put it in writing, which at the Ledran residence was the highest honor a thing could be given. So I kept the east wing. I cleaned the room where he had been, every morning, on the dawn rota, the rota nobody wanted, which I wanted now more than ever. I open the shutters and let the red morning in. And there is a particular hour just after dawn when the light comes through the mended glass and breaks into colors along the gray marble floor, and I look at the colors. I look at them properly, the way he taught me, the way you look when looking is a thing you have not yet finished, and I do not leave out the green. Once a year, on the morning I found him, one of them comes. Out of the high cold edge of the sky, down into the court, a single great dark shape, and it folds itself small and lowers its head to the level of mine, and it speaks to me in my own plain language, and it tells me he is well, that he sits among his people now in a new house built up among new trees, that he keeps the names still, and that the young ones come to him to learn them, and that he sends his root beneath the root his regards. They tell me the chain is mending, that he has begun the long slow pouring of the names into the young ones, year on year, the way it was always meant to go, and that what the dark nearly took has been set going again, unhurried now, with no fire at its heels. And then it is gone again into the morning, and I take up my cart and my keys, and I go and see about the draft, because the small thing, the near thing, the thing in front of you, that is the only language some of us are ever given. But I have come to believe it is enough. I have come to believe, on the strength of one old blind dragon in the back of a forgotten house, that it may be the only language that ever truly mattered at all. They called me a house cleaner. It was true, and I was never ashamed of it. But there are 9 of them, and an old gray one besides, and a whole high country come back from the dead, who call me something older. And on the mornings when the knee is bad and the house is cold, and I wonder, the way the old do, whether any of it amounted to anything. I say the older name over to myself, the root beneath the root, and I open the shutters, and I let in the dawn.